I'm Tara Andringa, and I'm the Executive Director of Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, or PAVE. PAVE is very excited to partner with the U.S. Department of Transportation today for this webinar to talk about the potential of autonomous vehicles to make transportation more accessible, and in particular to talk about the department's Inclusive Design Challenge. The modern era of AV technology was ignited by the DARPA Challenge, in which the Defense Department offered prizes to researchers to encourage technological advances. Following that model, the US DOT's Inclusive Design Challenge encourages industry to compete on projects that would maximize the transformative potential of AV technology. We at PAVE believe deeply in the potential of automated vehicles to improve our transportation system, to make our roads safer, to make them more sustainable, and to improve mobility. But of the many potential benefits of AVs, one that stands out as particularly life-changing is the potential to provide independence to the millions of Americans who have travel-limiting disabilities. There are more than 25 million people in that category, according to federal data. So basic life functions, things like getting a job or going to a medical appointment or obtaining groceries, can be difficult due to our collective dependence on human driving. Autonomous driving technology offers immense possibility in making progress, but it won't happen on its own. It's up to us to ensure that an integral part of the shift to autonomy is creating a more accessible transportation system. AVs offer the potential for a once-in-a-century change in our transportation system, and this provides us an opportunity to create a more inclusive system, but we need to ensure that we're creating a new system that works for all members of our community. Today's webinar is a step forward toward that commitment. The Inclusive Design Challenge inspires teams to innovate on this technological challenge, and PAVE is incredibly proud to support the department's effort. We have a great program for today, which includes 4 conversations with experts from academia, from industry, and from nonprofits. First, we'll start with a conversation with Finch Fulton, who is the US DOT's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy, to talk about the Inclusive Design Challenge. Next is an overview on the state of accessible technology to talk about the areas of greatest need. Next, we'll talk about the principles of universal design and how this applies to accessibility of AVs. And finally, we'll provide some practical advice on inclusive design for teams participating in the challenge. Thank you so much for joining our event today and for the teams working on submissions. We're excited to see the projects take shape and how they deliver on the promise of an autonomous future for everyone. I'd like to welcome our first guest, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy, Finch Fulton, to talk about the Inclusive Design Challenge. Hi, Finch, welcome.
Hey, Tara, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
We're thrilled to work with you on this. Let's start big picture. Could you talk about what the Inclusive Design Challenge is and what the department hopes to accomplish with it?
Absolutely. Well, I think many of you have heard Secretary Chow talk about what the federal role of the government is, or what the role of the federal government is in the development of these technologies. One of the key areas is around accessibility. We have to partner with the private sector innovators that are creating this technology early on so we can shape the development and make sure it can be accessible for all as this technology develops. Now, I'll be honest, we've been worried about getting this message out. With everything going on with the coronavirus, we haven't been able to have the in-person workshops with everybody, haven't been able to see people in person at events and the like to make sure that we're getting that input. So we have a great worry that not enough attention was going on with this. So Tara, that's why I can't thank you enough for bringing together this event. This is one of the most worthwhile initiatives in all of government, and one of the things I'm most excited about working on, because you said it, you talk about level 4 and level 5 automated vehicles, they can have such significant impacts on people's real lives, how they move about the country and around their hometowns. I mean, a lot of people just can't drive right now or require super expensive modifications to be able to use their vehicles, or just have barriers in the way trying to take normal transportation, getting to work, getting to see family and the like. So we have a lot of work to do to ensure that automated vehicles can become accessible, and we have to do the work now. I think everybody knows that there is no such thing as a self-driving vehicle or an automated vehicle that's on the road and you can purchase one today. That's not the case. But if we do the work today to shape the research while the technology is still developing, And while the vehicle design is evolving, we can be an effective mechanism to lowering the barriers for innovators to be able to include inclusive design mechanisms and principles into their ideas, so that people that have physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities can be able to use these in the future. So through this challenge and through using federal dollars, we're hoping to find those solutions to improve the accessibility, to have the cross-disciplinary collaboration, to incentivize the development of new designs and technologies, to lower the barriers to accessibility, and to tap into the creativity and knowledge of the people that actually have disabilities and the subject matter experts, along with the researchers, advocates, and entrepreneurs. Bring them all together, because I love the saying, nothing about us without us. So we have to do this all together.
It's a perfect description, and really appreciate the department's leadership in this. Could you talk about how the challenge works? Take us through the steps that competitors go through.
Absolutely. So if you may remember, Secretary Chow announced the program back in October 29th of last year. We put out the application process early this year, and then we extended it by 2 months because we wanted to make sure, in particular, our research partners at universities could be able to participate. So we extended it all the way to October 30th. And it is a two-stage program. The first stage is focused on brief written proposals describing the design solutions. So people have about a month and a week to get that together. And it is very much a paperwork drill, but it is super important because those semifinalists will be selected in early 2021 to be able to compete for that total purse prize of $5 million. So we have stage one that'll be announced early next year for probably up to 10 semifinalists that can receive $300,000 each. And those are going to move forward. They're going to get that funding to move forward to stage two, where they're going to develop prototype demonstrations of their concepts. So at the end of that second stage, the 3 finalists will receive the remainder of that $5 million prize purse. And we, of course, have additional monies that we're thinking about in the future to shape these initiatives and to keep this going. This is not a one-time deal. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And we're going to have that continued engagement at a number of different levels throughout this initiative.
Great. And can you also give a sense of the types of proposals that teams are working on? Is it hardware or hardware and software? What types of projects does it include?
Yeah, it's both. It can be hardware, it can be software, it can be a combination of both. And ideas should really feature things that are going to allow people that have physical disabilities, wheelchair or otherwise, sensitive disabilities, cognitive disabilities, that, there are multiple tasks, multiple steps to a trip. So we always talk about, the complete trip. So there are a lot of things where, again, you have to have people that actually have these disabilities that actually face these challenges work together on these, because some of these I wouldn't think about. You have to be able to locate the vehicle itself. You've got to be able to enter into the vehicle. You've got to be able to secure passengers and equipment. You have to put information in about where you want to go. You have to be able to, interact with these systems during normal situations or when something goes wrong in an emergency situation. Then you got to be able to exit it and get to where you're going. There are a lot of common sense steps that somebody that hasn't really faced these challenges may forget to think through as they're working on concepts and as they're thinking about a complete trip.
Great, and curious how you choose the winners. What is the criteria that the judges will be using to evaluate the proposals?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we have a lot of great career staff experts in the department. So, of course, first and foremost, they look at the proposal for technical merit. Just, does the proposal advance the state of practice? Is it something new? Does it have the technical detail and understanding that shows that there's an understanding behind what they're doing? And then also, is there a well-qualified team? Do they have people that are part of their team that can, one, make sure that the technical analysis is correct and is thoughtful, but two, make sure that they understand user needs. So that's a key part of it. Second, of course, is production feasibility. It's great to have great ideas, but we want to be able to put these into practice. And that's, I think, what is so key about this. So being able to show how these can be integrated into a production vehicle and can actually be useful for those creating these vehicles. On that note, you've also got to be able to talk about cost and other adoption considerations, how you're going to overcome the risks that you can foresee and challenges, and then, of course, safety considerations. And then finally, it's going to be about impact and benefit. You want to get the most benefit and impact from each federal dollar spent. So, the ability to describe and demonstrate what those benefits are, and then, demonstrates engineering around inclusive design that really lays the foundation for the future of automated vehicles. Now there is more to it that we can talk about, but I think everybody knows you can go to transportation.gov/accessibility/inclusive design, or just transportation.gov/accessibility, and then click the inclusive design button. We've got more there, but a lot of it is some of the key things that you would expect.
Great. And actually, I will just put in a quick plug. We also put on the PAVE website the links to the DOT website, and also some other resources that we hope are useful. The last question I had, Finch, is are there opportunities for individuals to contribute even if they can't get a team and proposal together?
Yes, and I think that's fundamental. So first, obviously, we're accepting proposals until October 30th. No reason to wait till the last second. There's always seems to be applications that come in right past the deadline, and we literally are not allowed to accept it beyond 1 minute being late. We had to get a legal ruling that if the deadline's at 8 p.m., we can accept it until 8:01 p.m., but we literally cannot accept it afterwards. Anyway, so the first stage requirement is a 10-page concept. So there is time for teams to come together to submit a proposal. So first, if you can join a team, please do it. Even if you're not planning to submit a proposal, there's still ways to stay engaged. Part of this is through the second stage. We do anticipate hosting one or more interactive sessions around that so that people can provide feedback, and where teams can demonstrate their prototypes and be able to interact with subject matter experts for industry or the disability communities. You can sign up for the updates at our website if you're interested in participating, and we will also make sure you stay up to date on other areas. But I think it's also key that we have several other resources for teams planning to submit a proposal. Our Inclusive Design Challenge website includes external reports and information on user needs, things like the potential of AVs to address accessibility needs and design considerations, and frequently asked questions, a page that addresses some of those common concerns and questions. We're, of course, always available. You can reach us at inclusivedesign@dot.gov. I'm finch.fulton@dot.gov. I know we have Sophia Gallo, who's one of our just terrific non-career experts that has really put a focus on accessibility. She's done a terrific job with this program. She's at Sophia, SOFIA.gallo, GALLO @dot.gov. And the whole DOT team is at your service, because this is something, again, we cannot be more excited about. When you talk about things that you enjoy waking up and working on, I mean, this is it. This is everybody participating in this, and everybody hopefully submitting applications. This really brings a joy. It's a joyful program to work on. So we're excited to help.
It's fantastic, Finch, and thank you for your leadership and for that of the department on this area, and for teaming with us on this webinar today. We are so excited.
Yeah, I can't thank y'all enough. And it looks terrific. I mean, it seems like everything anybody needs to know about how to put together a good application, y'all are highlighting and bringing attention to it. And again, I can't thank y'all enough for bringing attention to this initiative as a whole. It's super important to Secretary Chow. It's important to me. It's important to Sophia. And I think it's important to everybody working in this space. So just thank you so much for this.
My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I'm the communications director for PAVE, Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. I'm thrilled to be here today to discuss a topic that I feel extremely passionate about. I really share the sentiments that Finch Fulton just shared with us. We have two amazing guests here to sort of give us an overview of accessibility technologies for autonomous vehicles, the state of the art and areas of need. The first is Robert Sheehan. He is the multimodal program manager, the ITS Joint Program Office, and he works at the Accessible Transportation Technologies Research Initiative, which essentially does what this panel is all about. Welcome, Robert.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're also very pleased to have here today Dr. Rory Cooper. He is the director of the University of Pittsburgh's Human Engineering Research Laboratories, and just the recipient of a considerable DOT grant also to study accessibility technologies for autonomous vehicles. So we really have two of the best qualified people imaginable to introduce us to this topic. Robert, I'm actually going to start with you really quick and ask you to sort of explain one of the things that ATTRI does just to help sort of understand the landscape of technology, accessibility technology that's out there. You sort of break it into categories, and I think it's sort of around the idea of a trip and the different parts of a trip. Could you just explain sort of how you break the technology into categories, either around the trip or in other ways that you do, just so we understand the different categories?
No, that's great. Yeah, we can, a great way to frame the conversation, and it builds off of what Finch described as nothing, you know, as stated, nothing about us without us. And that is or was and is the driver of ATRI and the overall effort, where we identified focus areas and technology concepts built around a better understanding of user needs by engaging the full community of stakeholders. So when we were developing, actually this was, you know, many years ago, 2014 or 13, when we started the project and the program, that resulted in a number of different projects like standards review, policy impact assessment, evaluation and metrics, and also prototype developments of technologies to support discrete parts of the complete trip. And that's where it came from. We started talking about the ability to provide a technology solution for one part of a person's trip. It could be pre-trip planning, concierge service, en route navigation and wayfinding, would be assistance within an AV or robotics assistance, or navigating and negotiating conflicts on a surface street, whether it's at an intersection like we're doing in Pittsburgh, or we did with CMU for a safe intersection crossing, so that a person can communicate with a signalized intersection, and then perhaps the intersection could adjust its timing to meet the speed necessary for a person to cross. But really, it's how those parts work together. It's how the pre-trip planning properly reflects the full trip that that person will encounter. And again, as was stated in the beginning, not just under normal conditions, but what happens when conditions go outside of what was planned for. In addition, and especially, we wanted to look at the needs for a trip for everybody. So looking at a person who has a visual, hearing, cognitive, or mobility disability, and understanding specific user needs for those capabilities, and then breaking it down into a better understanding of barriers. So we conducted a comprehensive user needs assessment when a webinar, stakeholder engagements, presented user journeys, trip scenarios, combinations of various trip travel activity links to get a better understanding of the needs before we got into the technology prototype development.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many, when you start to think about all of the elements of that, there's just so much scope for really great, improvements. Dr. Cooper, you've just got this grant to research accessibility technologies for the DOT. Obviously, that work is ongoing. I'm wondering, sort of, what are some of the areas where we've seen sort of some of the most innovation in accessibility technologies and systems and features over the last few years?
Well, I think that the introduction of the early levels of autonomy that we have now are pretty exciting. If you think about even just back over a decade ago with ABS braking, but now you have anti-skid steering and smart cruise control and lane following, and for that matter, even automatic braking on backup, things like that. And those things people sometimes overlook have already made a tremendous impact on allowing people with disabilities and older adults either to continue to drive or to begin driving that they might not have been able to do before those technologies were introduced. And of course, as we achieve greater levels of autonomy in vehicles, that affords even more opportunities for people with disabilities from a wide range, from individuals with intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, older adults, to create a more inclusive, on-demand transportation environment, as I would like to call it. And so that's now, of course, the challenge is that we have to make sure that as this technology advances, it becomes inclusive.
Absolutely. And hopefully this inclusive design challenge is one of the ways to help do that. Robert, do you have anything to add on specific areas that have seen, particularly dramatic improvement in technology for accessibility?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of use Finch again as a jumping off PowerPoint where he talked about some of the examples of the challenges for a person to utilize any vehicle or on-demand service, whether it's a AV or some form of automation or not. And one example is that connection, that wayfinding, that connection for that transaction so that vehicle can pick you up. So one key part of our technology area is looking at wayfinding, navigation, the standards to help develop that. So it's the data availability for all the pathways, crosswalks, and basically a better understanding of the infrastructure. And then working with cities so as they gather data, they can make it available. So we've made some progress there with our project. It's actually in Pittsburgh again, pure coincidence, with the company Pathways to help map out sidewalks and crosswalks, so better understanding the true accessibility of those facilities. And then we see some examples elsewhere. And then that layers into one of our other projects that we worked with the company AbleLink in Colorado Springs to make a better standard for availability of data transfer from public agencies or others for users. So we're making progress in those areas for sure. To me, that connects to, again, it's how that AV fits into the complete delivery of a trip for a person. Because one example we do, and I'll hand off the comment after, is we visualize in the beginning, we look at these user journeys and try to visualize what a complete trip really is. And I want to get that trip. I need to get the vehicle. I need to get in the vehicle. So there's a number of challenges right there. If it's for a vehicle for hire, I need to complete that transaction. So what side of the street, what corner of the street, can I get to that corner? Can that vehicle get to me? And then are you dropping me off at a place that is accessible? And I have to continue my journey, and those two things have to have to match. And so the data availability for the wayfinding is a key part of that.
Fascinating. And Dr. Cooper, sort of where are the areas that sort of need the most progress, whether they're, and maybe if you can add sort of what might be holding some of that back just to prepare the teams that are looking for opportunities to contribute here.
Well, first, thanks for the plug for Pathway Access Solutions. That's a rural spinoff, so it's great to know that they're also working with Robert. So I think the teams could focus on any one of a number of things, as Robert was saying. How do you communicate with the vehicle? How do you request a vehicle? How do you convey your needs to the vehicle? How does the vehicle understand your needs? In other words, drop where it's going to drop you off. So let's take an individual who has an intellectual impairment. If they take a bus now, then they're typically have communication with the bus driver, knows exactly where to let them off. It might be somebody who meets them at the other end. And so we have to augment that now with the vehicle, right? Because they're not likely to be, there won't be, in the future, ideally there wouldn't be a person in the vehicle except for the other passengers. Then you have to figure out how to get in the vehicle, whether it's a manual wheelchair user like myself, or a power wheelchair user, or a visually impaired person, or an older person that uses a walker or crutches or cane. And then the other thing is, what if you have items? What if I'm carrying groceries or other, how do I get that into the vehicle safely? And then if you're our wheelchair passenger, how do you, do you transfer into the wheelchair, into the vehicle, or do you use your wheelchair as a seat in a vehicle? If that's the case, how do you tie down the wheelchair, and how to use the occupant restraint safely in the vehicle? So there's a lot about it, but making both the autonomy side and the accessibility side. The other thing is that we should get some consideration is that currently, except for small light buses and bus systems, vehicles are modified to become accessible. They're not, so I recently just purchased a car, right? I purchased actually 2 weeks ago, and I still haven't got it because it's being modified. And that's the case if you have autonomous vehicles. Until we get to full autonomy on these semi-autonomous vehicles, how do you safely do those types of modifications as well? And I bring that up particularly because most autonomous vehicles now, and most likely more so in the future, are going to be electric. And most modified vehicles are internal combustion engine vehicles. They're built on a different, entirely different vehicle structures.
And just how does that, sort of practically play? Are there unique challenges related to accessibility in electric vehicles?
Yes, because they're typically built on a unified skateboard. And whereas modified vehicles are either, so the modified vehicles that you transfer into, just a regular sedan, for example, those probably can be modified relatively easily with as we go to electric vehicles and more autonomous type electric vehicles. But if we're talking about things like minivans and even light pickup trucks, right, where where oftentimes the floor is dropped to have a ramp added, that's more challenging if you have a chassis type vehicle. As a matter of fact, we used to have chassis type vehicles for those of us that have been around long enough to remember that. And oftentimes what we had at that point was a lift that extended from the vehicle and raised up and down. But those tended to be rather troublesome and somewhat unreliable, and people greatly prefer the dropped floor with the ramp. And so those are things that are, I think for this design challenge, what's exciting is to take a step back and let's say, how would you design an accessible vehicle from the ground up? And I also think it'd be exciting to an accessible autonomous vehicle from the ground up, which also means likely an accessible electric vehicle from the ground up. And the other thing is to look at, how would you, and also you could have a second group looking at how would you modify existing vehicles that they would also be both safe, reliable, and easy to use.
Absolutely. And Robert, since again, we're trying to help teams prepare for this, sort of from a high level sort of survey, like, are there, in the areas where there had been sort of a lack of progress or more need for progress, are there identifiable obstacles that teams might be aware of? And I know we'll get into some of the practical hands-on design sort of issues, in the subsequent, but any thoughts on that?
So yeah, I'll let the next speakers talk about specifics within an AV, just because I can cover the concepts and barriers and needs that we identify through ATRI in general, but they're applicable. And so I'll answer that question by also referencing Dr. Cooper's example and what was stated before about not just getting the vehicle, but all the other things that need to be done while you're in a trip and while you're on that vehicle. Communicating to the securing, communicating your intent, communicating any other decision during the process. And so you have to consider all the activities that would be and need to be done during that leg of a trip, where before you may be able to communicate to the driver, how are you communicating with the driving mechanism at that point to the driver? What's the appropriate way if you're visually impaired, if you're hearing impaired, if you don't have access to any physical feature to allow that to happen. So bringing that over into kind of the needs and barriers, we've grouped them into some general needs that apply to this as well. One, information. The most frequently identified category of user need when we did this is information. It's a critical component of mobility. So existing and emerging technologies present opportunities to meet the information needs for people with disabilities. Getting travel options. AVs is a huge part of the travel option, having additional travel option, whether it's, again, your own vehicle or a on-demand service or not. Travel assistance, one of the key drivers of our program or project, and I want to make it clear, I represent a team of people who have been leading this effort in the DOT from Federal Transit Administration and from the Office of Highways Research and Development, Mohammed Yusuf, Rick Upstelton, and Murata May, who kind of help bring on this all together. And then one of the key, attributes of the vision were independence and spontaneous travel. So when we look at these things, we look at it through that lens to allow those things to happen. So although we identify information, options, and assistance and access as 4 key things, it's the ability to provide the assistance appropriate for the user. And so that really gets to some of the barriers we're looking at. The adverse perception of travel. Sometimes it's difficult if you don't understand the complexity of the travel, and if you have a certain expectation that it's going to be difficult, you have a less probability of taking a trip independently. Cost, inadequate infrastructure. So we're working on AVs, and you can see, if not through my comments, but through this statement, that I'm looking at where the AVs fit in the larger context. So what's the infrastructure? If that AV is dropping off, where are you dropping off? Is it at midpoint of a curb? Is that the curb cut, where now you have a confluence of many users at that corner? Are the other tools necessary to support that trip? The access, and as Dr. Cooper referenced, there's things to get in and out of vehicle. I don't have to repeat those. But the traveler support, one of the biggest barriers identified was lack of travel support and customer service. And then the specific driving barriers, which also AVs really help potentially conquer. So those were the core kind of barriers and the core 4 user need areas. And we can dive deeper into those. And that's what we did. And I think that's I guess that's probably the point. What we did is a process, and that's the process that we want, to share, is to use those user journeys, work with people to help understand when you're walking through it. That gets you understand the challenges within a particular environment, and it takes working with stakeholder groups to help understand that.
Absolutely, and we've shared some of the research that Atria has done on this in the resources list that went out to everyone who registered for this event. And so definitely check that out. And there's much more on the Atria website. I really encourage you. It's a phenomenal resource. I really wasn't aware of it myself, and it's really amazing to see how much great research there is. And I think teams will find it really helpful. Dr. Cooper, as someone who not only researches this stuff, but you're actually a user of a lot of these technologies. Sort of what would be the things that you would caution teams who are still at the point of trying to figure out what area they want to even go into before they get into the actual design process themselves? What are the pitfalls that they should be aware of?
Well, the first thing they should be aware of is if they're not engaging end users or potential end users, they're going to go off track. I mean, the key is that this needs to be an end user design process. And I actually, even though it's an accessible design challenge, it should be, we're talking about inclusivity here, right? So it's about allowing people to go to work and go to church and go to vote and go to school and participate in their communities and go to shopping. So looking at the total experience. The other thing is that autonomous vehicles have another tremendous opportunity, and that's that, we've all experienced this. Not everybody is a good driver, and everybody has kind of their preferences as a passenger and a driver. And some of those are not preferences, and so they requirements, right? Might have a vestibular problem. Low bone density or other things like that. And so that's another nice feature, is that you could, with autonomous vehicles, you could kind of select your driving characteristics, right? You could say, I like the vehicle driving a certain way, and have those preferences. So, I think, one of the things that I think is possible is you could really, without so much getting into the idea of the vehicle itself, but just think more about transportation as a system or an experience, look at what information would a service or a vehicle, most likely both, need to collect in order to optimize that experience. So I think the nice thing about this challenge, you could take this from multiple perspectives. How would you improve the entire experience, design a better vehicle, how would you design a better system? All of them, I think, would be valuable to this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of this panel, and I think that's the perfect tee up for our next discussion about the principles of universal design and how to apply them to autonomous vehicles. But first, I want to thank both of our guests, Dr. Rory Cooper and of Pittsburgh University's Human Engineering Research Laboratories, and Robert Sheehan of ATTRI ATRI. Thank you both so much for being here and sharing with your deep experience in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bob.
Thank you.
My name is Tabitha Coulter, and I'm PAVE's Director of Operations and the moderator for our second panel on the principles of universal design in autonomous vehicles. I'm joined today by two stellar panelists who I'll go ahead and introduce briefly while they're getting on. So Carol Tyson just joined. They're the Government Affairs Liaison for the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, or DREDF, where they've been an active presence in the National and DC area transportation scene, calling for equity and accessibility across all modes of transportation. Carol, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. And our second panelist is Susana Costa, who is an assistant professor at the University of Minho in Portugal, where she works in industrial engineering and management, as well as occupational safety and ergonomics. Susana, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So diving right into our conversation, I want to start with you, Susana, for our first question. Could you explain to our audience what universal design is and how it relates to accessibility?
So I would start to explain or try to convey what accessibility is, because I think, in my point of view, universal design is a broader concept with an objective that is more noble, so more complex. Basically, when you talk about accessibility, you are talking about the ability to access something. So you're focusing on enabling someone who has abilities different from the typical user to do something with an equivalent amount of effort, time expenditure, without causing frustration, in a safely manner, to do something. So basically, you're not worried about whether you have to do or use or resort to a different channel in order for that person to accomplish that task. Okay? This has a problem in the perspective of universal design, because if you have to use an alternative channel, the person will be able to complete the task, but he or she will do it in a very conspicuous manner. And that may be inclusive design, but it's not universal design. Because, and by using the term inclusive, I'm already saying that I need to include you in something. So I'm being discriminatory in some way. Universal design, as I was saying, is a broader perspective on the possibilities for everyone to use the product or service, even with assistive technology. So true universal design is only accomplished if everyone is using that. Why? I use it because I need it, because it complies with the principles of universal design, and so I'm able to do it. But a typical user would use it because he can also, or she can also benefit from it, or because he or she likes it. It's a very good perspective that I got from Asenthal, who is an expert in this matter. And what he says is, if you fail to do everything else to try and make your concept attractive to everyone, try and appeal to the hedonic properties of it. Because if some will use it because they need it, others will use it because they like it. So I think the perspective of universal design is the truly inclusive and accessible one.
Great, thank you for helping clear up that difference in the importance of universal design. Before we move to automated vehicles as a specific context, I was wondering if you could walk us through the 7 principles that lie within universal design.
Yeah, of course. It's funny because it's almost common sense, something you would think of if you were starting to design something for everyone. Nevertheless, it is good to have them written and use them like a checklist. Okay, do I comply with this? Do I agree with this? So let's start with the first one, which is equitable use. This means that the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. So you really have to reach all potential users, all your stakeholders, all your end users. The flexibility in use, which is the second principle, states that the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. So once again, if you want to hear, or if you can hear, you may choose to hear, but if you can hear, you can choose to watch something. So if you provide both modalities, you're agreeing to some extent this principle. Simple and intuitive use is the third one. And this one implies that you don't have to have previous training in order to understand what how you have to interact with your object or with your system. It's simple and intuitive. And this is a difficult one because people have backgrounds, because cultures are different. So this is sometimes a difficult one to accomplish. And for that matter, I think that, for instance, focus groups and research and these kinds of discussions where you meet transnational, where you meet in a transnational way, you can have good insights for. So continuing, you have the fourth principle, which is perceptible information. And this means that the design, the product, the system communicates necessary information effectively to the user. So it's not efficiently, it's effectively. You have to understand what it is saying, and you have to understand it in a timely manner and with low effort also, regardless of the ambient conditions or the user's sensory abilities. Once again, here, multimodality is often used to comply with this principle. The tolerance for error. I have a small picture which I use in my classes to convey this message or this principle to my students. Which basically you have two switches, and this one destroys the world, and this one is one you have to switch on to switch the light. So basically, if you err in that, well, the harm that it can cause, it's great. So tolerance for error means that you have to design in a way that you minimize hazard and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. And human factor here is paramount. The sixth principle is low physical effort. So you have to have a design that can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum of fatigue, which is great for people who have different abilities from the typical user, but we can also benefit from it greatly. And size and space for approach and use. So you have to design regarding appropriate size and space provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use, regardless of the user's body type, posture, or mobility mode. Because one interesting thing is that when we started our research, we were thinking about HMIs, and we were very glad because, well, this is an opportunity, because here, until now, we had a mobility that was denied to people who couldn't see. And now we're working to get those people to get in the cars and to travel in a safety manner, to be autonomous and independent. And we were talking to a colleague, and he said, well, that's great, but I'm in a wheelchair, and you haven't thought of me in that sense. So how is your autonomous vehicle helping me in any way? And that kind of brought us here. You really need to accommodate all levels of abilities. And this is it. These were the 7 principles of universal design.
Thank you so much for kind of that high level overview. Carol, I was wondering if you could tie her explanation of the universal design principles to the fully accessible autonomous vehicle checklist that DREDIF has created.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Before I answer that, I just want to thank you. Thank you to PAVE, thank you to the Department of Transportation and everybody that's working on this, because this is an opportunity to truly change so many lives. I've seen it happen when people have access to an accessible vehicle and on-demand transportation. It's something that a lot of people take for granted. So I just want to say thank you. So DREDIF has worked in transportation advocacy for a very long time, and we saw that autonomous vehicles were coming, and so we thought we would just, as advocates, put a list out there of like, that's great, you're going to create this whole new mode, and we want it to be accessible. And it's better if we engage and let you know at the very beginning, because we've learned that if you wait and you do it after the mode has been built or designed, that it's going to cause a lot of headaches. It's going to be very expensive, all of those things. So we created a checklist, and Dr. Costa went through a lot of the things that are in the checklist, and Dr. Cooper spoke about things, and other folks who've already spoken. So it has a list of what we would need in the human-machine interface for it to be accessible for people with disabilities, and in the hardware of the vehicle. And it thinks about, or it tries its best to think about people with sensory disabilities, so people who are deaf or hard of hearing, blind and low vision, but also people with cognitive disabilities who may have an intellectual, developmental disability, or be autistic. And then physical disabilities, which has already been mentioned. So someone who uses a manual or a power wheelchair, or a walker, or may have difficulty with their hands. Just trying to think across the board and include as many people and potential riders as possible. And one of the reasons that we feel like this is so important is in the past, passenger vehicles are really something. Well, I think it was mentioned, like being able to buy a vehicle, and right now, if many people with physical disabilities have to have aftermarket modifications. But as transportation has changed and mobility has changed in this country and around the world, we really feel like AVs passenger vehicles will probably be used in fleets, and they'll be public use vehicles. And when it's public use, then they really need to be accessible. And we would even argue it's going to be required by the law. So we wanted to put this little checklist out there just to get conversations started. And since we put this checklist out, it's now a bit dated because it was the end of November in 2018. But there are just so many resources, like really like pages and pages and pages of like, this is how you do it from an engineer's perspective. So that's my long answer, sorry.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you mentioning those resources that are available on the DREDF website. Again, we've collected some on the PAVE website, so definitely check those out. No, that's really helpful. I was hoping next we could kind of ground this conversation in terms of a sort of real world example to explain to people. In the context of automated vehicles, could we provide an example of how taking a universal design approach might result in a different outcome compared to another design approach? I don't know if Susanna, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, for instance, we were considering the start button. And for us, it was it was clear that the start button should be where the regular cars have their start button. And then we started to see the universal design principles, and then something hit us. A blind person won't know where the start button is. So we had to make it readily accessible, probably on the armrest. Because, when you sit down, and if it's written in Braille or something that the rider can sense, he can acknowledge that that is the start button. Of course, in another way, we believe also that this can be beneficial for the regular user, because if it's near your hand, if you have a neutral posture and you can reach that button, you will also be benefiting from it. So that's one example, but there are several others. But one interesting point also, and this because I believe this advocates greatly to the use of universal design in concept design or in design in general, is that we came to an understanding that as things were getting refined, we were quickly approaching universal design. So this means that really evolution brings us to universal design. People can, or regular people can benefit greatly from it. And so it's interesting to see the cycle that was established. Also multimodality. When we started developing concepts for warnings, etc., we were wondering that having redundant messages could be beneficial for the technical user, once again, because if he failed to notice one warning, one modality, we would have a redundant modality. And this made us once more think of blind people. What if it's a deaf blind person? So let's insert haptic feedback because he can sense it in another way. So I really believe that it changes greatly, and in fact, it brings your concept to a level of refinement that is better than it would be without universal design.
Thank you so much. I'm curious now too about the relationship between universal design and trust in automated vehicles. Carol, could you give an example of an AV-related design decision that might help or hurt rider trust?
Well, I always think the question about trust is a little bit funny, because if the vehicle isn't accessible to somebody, to anybody, then the trust isn't going to matter. Like, it doesn't matter. If you can't actually get on the vehicle, if you require a ramp and there's no ramp, it doesn't. You could trust the vehicle all you want. It's not going to help you. And the same with if you're somebody who's blind or deaf and you can't communicate with it. If you can't find the vehicle, I mean, that will go. All of those things will go a long way towards helping trust with the trust issues. So if the folks who are designing the vehicles and the companies, that's the way to do it, I think, for the disability community. And then also, and I think that folks are beginning to learn this, but really engaging with the communities that you're hoping are going to be your riders. So we're talking about the disability community today, and nothing about us without us has been mentioned several times, but really it's a very practical mantra, because, and I think Dr. Cooper said this, if you don't engage with your potential riders at the beginning, you're not going to know, and you're going to get something wrong. It is obvious when you look at a design whether or not they talk to that potential rider. Like, it is so blatantly obvious. So that's one way of really engaging those communities either at the national level with organizations or at the local and state level, finding advocates and people who there are a lot of folks with disabilities are transportation geeks and want to talk about this and want to be involved. And reaching out to other communities, low-income communities, communities who will really benefit from new modes of transportation.
Absolutely. Kind of for our final piece in this conversation, I wanted to ask if either of you have practical suggestions for how to integrate these principles of universal design into workflows, particularly for people who, like you're talking about, Carol, may not have had that experience or are newer to this process. Carol, could you start maybe with some, where in the process people should begin, how to, just a basic how-to?
I believe firmly you should start at the very beginning. So, and then if you haven't, if you're already down the road, like as soon as you can. There are, and if you're looking for organizations or people to talk to, there's so many. The We Will Ride Coalition is a group of disability advocates who want to be engaged. I think we have a link somewhere to the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities has AV principles that 22 national disability organizations signed on to. All of those organizations are willing to talk to you and share. So yeah, as soon as possible is the gold standard.
Thank you. Susanna, anything else to kind of add there for practical advice?
Well, if I may speak, I agree with Carol. You shall do it as early in the process of concept development as you can. You need to get in contact with your stakeholders. You need to know when. We usually use focus groups to inform ourselves of what are their needs. We can even talk about the future. How do you see this happening? What would build trust for you for using AV? So you need to know your stakeholders, you need to predict future contexts and future needs of adaptation. And if you do it from the beginning and you are constantly monitoring your process using the principles list as a checklist, you will it will be fine. We use this focus group in the beginning and during the process. Is it okay for you? We're always trying to obtain feedback as we develop our concepts, and they give powerful insights of how the development should go. This won't work. Why not? It's all according to these principles, because we usually don't go there, we go the other way. So use people. I agree with Carol. I think that there are many people who want to be involved, and when you start talking, people open up and they suggest brilliant things.
Thank you. Well, that's the end of the time for this panel, but thank you again, Carol and Susanna, for joining us. I really appreciate your perspectives.
Now we've reached our third and final panel, and this is where the rubber really hits the road. We've tried to make everything here sort of practical and helpful to teams proposing on this, but this is the real, nitty gritty. And we have two guests here to help us through this this topic who have a huge amount of experience. First, we have Dr. Shani Giant. She is the Principal UX Designer at Volkswagen Group of America's Inclusive Mobility Initiative. Dr. Giant, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Dr. Clive D'Souza. He's the Director of the University of Michigan's Inclusive Mobility Research Lab. Dr. D'Souza, welcome.
Yeah, hi, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Shani, I'm going to start with you. What are the best ways to think about goal setting and KPIs for this kind of project, for an inclusive design project?
Sure. So I'm coming from the point of view working at a car company with really long-term projects. So what we do is usually we recognize who's being excluded from your product, first of all. So in this case, the product could be privately owned vehicles, current ride-sharing vehicles. It can change depending on how you want to look at AVs, and then work towards decreasing that exclusion. So you can really systematically break down who you are intentionally or unintentionally excluding. I believe in working really specifically and then generalizing. I know that I also believe in universal design, but I think that sometimes that can also maybe for people that are starting can seem a little maybe intimidating, because trying to make a product that's just perfect for everybody right away is really challenging. So I know at the company that I'm at, we kind of are thinking also about things in terms of generations and decreasing exclusion. When you work really specifically, often then you can generalize those solutions and they can work better for everyone. So yeah, just I think those are my main thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, and I was really glad to hear. I think every panel, every speaker we've had has mentioned the importance of including end users, early on throughout. At the risk of getting more of the same, which I think is actually fine. I think we can't say this enough from my limited understanding of this. Dr. D'Souza, Clive, excuse me. Maybe sort of what are some of the practical considerations to think about in terms of incorporating that end user feedback? As you're working on a project like this?
So I'll definitely echo the comments made by the previous panel that when it comes to engaging end users, we definitely want to do it early and often, right? So it's not a one-time thing. We definitely want to do it as an iterative process across the design cycle. I think Shani's point was excellent about identifying first who are the users that might potentially be excluded. So identifying those critical users, and they might be a function of what task you're kind of designing for, right? So one way to think about this is what would users need to do to successfully use your product or system, right? What capabilities, functionality would they need to have to accomplish these tasks? Who are the people that might potentially not be able to do that? Right, whether it is vision, cognition, decision-making, wayfinding, mobility, if it's entering and exiting a vehicle, and using that as your kind of your start point. Along the way, you want to definitely start finding new and possibly more kind of high fidelity ways of engaging your user. The early meetings might just be Zoom meetings like this, right? Just discussing concepts, ideas, what are some of the problems you encounter, and doing that with the people with a range of different disabilities. As you get into a better idea about what your design or product might be, you can then start prototyping. It could be a simple wireframe design of an app, or with software, we've done prototypes on PowerPoint, for example. Or a physical mock-up. We could build cardboard box or vehicle mock-ups in the lab, and engaging users in that and learning in terms of what challenges they have, what they like versus don't like, and how they would possibly modify their design to suit their needs and preferences. Eventually, later iterations, you're starting to think of a working prototype, right? Could be a test vehicle. In some of our projects with evaluating autonomous vehicles, we've done user testing with just the static vehicle. Because of safety considerations, we weren't feeling confident enough to actually take this vehicle on the road with a occupant with a disability. So we just did static evaluations and learned what works and doesn't work from the context of ingress, egress, interior circulation. Once we develop that, once you're more confident about the capabilities of the vehicle, in terms of safety, inclusion, access, you can then start thinking of actual road testing, right? So there are more than one ways to engage users. Definitely think of this as a process, not as a static time point. And as technology improves, as our understanding of people's needs improves, inclusive design will evolve, right? So again, it's a continuous process, almost like a continuous quality improvement process. It's not a static kind of time point.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add on that specifically, Shani?
Maybe one or 2 points. I mean, that was excellent and really well said. And I really like the point on that Clive made about just, you know, there's so many different methods. The important thing is just engaging your end users just throughout it, and you'll adapt to what you need, right? You don't have to plan it all out at the beginning. I think that the thing I just wanted to share is that, you know, it can help to have, just practically speaking, partnerships or, you know, close ties with organizations and communities, both local and national. So sometimes these big national organizations will have local chapters. So then you can, you know, have access to experts and also people that you can do some of your work with. And then the final thing I wanted to add, I don't know if it's totally your question, but just to reiterate that a lot of work has been done in this field, as we can see by all the resources that you're sharing. You know, Carol Tyson was mentioning like the checklist that DREDF has made, the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities has some great guidelines, and also the Auto Alliance from last year had a really great workshop series where they have a whole list of features. So I think, you know, just to tell contestants, again, you know, you don't have to come up with some crazy new problem statement necessarily. There's so many problems that have already been listed out, and I think there's really novel ways that people can come up with solutions for that. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and everyone who registered for this event, again, does have a list to that, access to that list of resources. I do hope you check it out. There's so much really great stuff there. You will find it useful. I also actually want to make a quick plug for the PAVE member, National Federation for the Blind. They actually said that they are more than willing to work with any team that approaches them. You can reach out to them directly, or you can reach out to us as well, pavecampaign.org/contact, use the any other inquiry form, and we'll put you in touch with them. Also, you can go to the DOT, the Inclusive Design Open Forum. I think they'll put a post there to sort of make this offer there as well, and that's the place that DOT has designated to connect folks who want to contribute with resources, and I highly recommend. They've been really wonderful members for us. So just wanted to make sure we got that out there. So Shani, I want to stick with you for a moment. What are sort of the most common ways that accessible design projects fail? And how can those common mistakes be avoided? Sort of maybe in like where, you know, do those mistakes tend to happen early in the conceptual phase? Is it more in the execution? Sort of where does failure happen?
I think a few people have already mentioned, I think probably the biggest failure is just, you know, not working with your end users, like from the beginning, right? That's just a really surefire way to fail. So don't do that. But I think also, you know, a little bit more nuanced is I've seen some people then saying, okay, I'm going to work with, you know, say that I want to work on wheelchair securement. I'm going to just talk to a few people who use wheelchairs, which is great because like having everyday lived experiences is so vital. But I think it's also really important to talk to disabled experts in the field that have been working on this for like decades, and they actually really know the bigger context. So I think just having a mix of people you're talking to is really important, and it can that can help you avoid making some kind of like new mistakes at the beginning, I think. And Another way that I think projects can fail is when lots of groups are working in parallel on the same issue without communication between them. And I think this can just end up in a lot of wasted effort and a slower path to coming up with real solutions. So there needs to be some sort of larger organization or forum that can jumpstart the process and facilitate, kind of like, you know, DOT's been doing and, you know, what PAVE's doing now. I think it's really great to just get everyone talking together.
Great. And Clive, do you have anything to add to that? I'm sure you've seen examples of this happening.
Yeah, just a couple of points, and I think I'll just build upon what Shani is saying. So firstly, inclusive design is more than just about people with disabilities, right? It's also about people aging, so older adults, people of low income, people with a language barrier, for example, who may not speak English as their first language. So there's lots of kind of constituents that comprise inclusive design. To avoid it being a little overwhelming at the start, what I would recommend is, you know, you want to try to find your kind of like your own advisory board, right? People that are disability experts who have this big picture view, who understand kind of the problem in a slightly broader perspective in terms of their own lived experience, but also those of others. A great group to work with is, staff at local centers for independent living. Almost each city has one. Just search online, and I'm sure there'll be people there. We've worked with the NFB, with the Michigan State's National Federation for the Blind before. They've been great. So the state chapters for these organizations, if you can identify at least one or two of these representatives from some of the core constituent groups, that's a great starting point, right? So it avoids becoming too overwhelming. The one other place that I think where sometimes projects fail is that, and I'm an engineer myself, so I'll say this, we often focus on trying to get the technology to work right. And we say, oh, we'll worry about accessibility later, right? So let's get it to work and then we'll make it accessible. And that comes at a severe price. Firstly, it adds to cost, but you also end up making trade-offs or compromises in the design, right? And so one place I think that we definitely want to be mindful about, or common pitfall, is making sure that accessibility and inclusion becomes integral to the entire design process, right? So it's like one essential part of the team. Another area where I think I wouldn't call it a failure, but more like a myth. It's when we think of compliance with accessibility standards as being sufficient, right? And it's important to note that federal standards like the Americans with Disabilities Act, accessibility guidelines, DOT standards, FMVSS standards, those are great, but they're intended to be the initial, like a starting point. They provide minimum requirements for accessibility, right? They're very important. Compliance is great, but if you're really looking at inclusion and the vast diversity of people who might be using your product, it's important to really go beyond those ADA standards, right? So just complying with federal standards in terms of inclusive design, I think is really the baseline, the minimum that you can do. You really should be thinking about trying to exceed that.
Yeah, and Shani, are there any other thoughts that you have about sort of the role of these sort of legal consideration? Because this is something in this area, you do have to be aware of the legal considerations, even if that's just sort of the minimum baseline, as Clive just said.
Right, I definitely agree with everything that Clive said. I'd say, you know, some of these legal standards and guidelines are also quite old, right? And it's good to keep that in mind that, you know, AVs are a really relatively new topic still. And, you know, eventually, you know, people are starting to push for different standards and there's going to be a new landscape there. So also, I think that's just another reason as well to keep in mind that these are very base guidelines, but some of them were developed at another time. And it's really important to, you know, to talk to people like, you know, the US Access Board, talk to, you know, even if things aren't passed immediately for regulatory issues, like, you know, eventually, hopefully they will be. So try to design for the future instead of being stuck in the rules that have already been set, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Clive, so this is the meaty one. You know, what are the tools and techniques that might not be commonly known about? that will be helpful to people. And we've tried to include some of these in our resources, but if you want to, maybe explain some of what you've included in the resources, or any other just maybe, tools of the trade that people really need to be aware of.
Yeah, so one of the kind of tools we've used a lot is just prototypes and simulations, right? Just simulating the product or the system or the design the best you can, even if it is something very crude. I've worked on projects where we've looked at accessibility of an autonomous driverless pod. We started out with cardboard and plywood walls, right? Just to figure out spatial requirements and configuration, ingress, egress, very crude. And then at later stages, you start improving the fidelity of those prototypes, right? It could be a very mocked up shuttle leading up to the actual end product. So don't be afraid. Every step, as long as you're bringing in users, right, you'll constantly be learning something. And so one of the tricks, I think, is to engage users in a way that not just focuses on the current task, but allows them to dig into that vast, rich set of experiences that they bring, right? So even though we were focusing on this one driverless shuttle in the lab, people were bringing up experiences of riding buses, of riding the paratransit van, and all the accidents or the near-miss accidents that they've encountered, right? And so the act of engaging people in this kind of this tactile experience allows you to then tap into this vast resource of information, right? So even if you're to the contestants or the students on the webinar right now, even if your idea is somewhat crude, even if all you have is a few sketches or some wireframe drawings, it's never too late to actually engage, even if it's a few end users, and you'll actually learn a lot. Likewise, you want to make use of analogies. You want to give people examples of what your system is trying to accomplish using examples from everyday life, because a lot of the technologies with regards to driverless vehicles is still new, and sometimes end users may not fully know what problem or gap this is trying to address, right? So there are methods, there are techniques you can use to try to engage users, try to elicit that information that they have. And that's part of the fun part of doing this type of work, right? You learn so much, and no two people that come into your study or into your lab will ever be the same, right? They're all bringing different experiences. And so don't shy away from that, even though some of the knowledge that you've learned may not make its way into the current iteration of your design. Perhaps it will make it into the next iteration or the one after that, right? So again, I'll re-emphasize it's a process, but you want to be creative and find new ways to actually engage users and try to extract information. So,
and really quickly, you also included, you mentioned simulation in your answer, and you included in our resource section, you provided some really fascinating websites about, and I don't even know how to pronounce it, it's anthropometry?
Anthropometry websites, so
Yeah.
resources. So just very quickly, one of the common problems early on is trying to determine spatial requirements for physical fit, right? And we're talking about the space or the volume that people might need. These are kids, these are middle-aged, older adults, people of a range of different BMI. So colleagues here at the University of Michigan have developed a fantastic resource on 3D body scans, looking at people of different BMIs, different age ranges, which you can then extract and plop them into your CAD drawings, right? The work I've been doing with my colleagues at the University of Buffalo, we've been looking at the anthropometry of people that use wheelchairs. So how much space or volume they might, a wheelchair user might take up if they're a manual versus a powered wheelchair user. With the resources that we pointed out, you can quickly extract that information and again, plop it into your CAD model, just to get an understanding of how much space you might need to accommodate or provide in your designs.
Yeah, and Johnny, any tools that people should be aware of that they might not be?
Clive went over so much, which was great. I think that, maybe just from a slightly different point of view, just like, when you are actually doing work with people with disabilities, just to make sure that your sessions are accessible. So whether it's like the layout of a room, where people have to meet, how long certain activities might take, making sure, you might have Braille printouts, audio versions, or ASL interpreters, just to keep all of that in mind. And I think that, to reiterate the point on, you can start kind of lo-fi as well. We use lots of common methodologies, like you could use focus groups, user journeys, co-design workshops, interviews, ride-alongs, surveys, Zoom calls. It's all everything is great as long as you just start the engagement process. So I think just using what you do in any other sort of research project. And then finally, I think just, Robert from the first panel was talking about the complete journey. I think it's really great to use that as a tool as well. And, even if you're working on just a really specific part of that journey, make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Attree website, as I already mentioned, it's just so full of great stuff. And yeah, you can really see, sort of target the different parts of the trip. So we have a ton of audience questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'll just say that given that we're in the times of this, the COVID-19 pandemic right now, a lot of in-person type data gathering and research might be a little limited. So you can still do a lot of this online via Zoom or other conferencing software, right? These tools right now are very accessible. They've got closed captioning and a bunch of other features that will still allow you to engage users of various different disabilities. So it's not an excuse, I would say, to not engage your end user.
Good point.
Absolutely. So one of the audience questions that we got when people registered is from Local Motors, and they were asking, how do you see inclusive design applied differently to private versus shared vehicles? Shauna, you work at an OEM that I imagine is probably working on at least a little bit of both. Could you share your perspective on that?
Sure. So I think just simply just thinking about the use cases. So a private vehicle, you can heavily adapt that to a particular user, with conversions, setting it all up once you buy a vehicle. While I think Carol was mentioning, a shared vehicle is going to have to work for many users. So it's a bigger challenge, but I think it's also has a huge benefit because, for example, if you made a shared vehicle accessible with a ramp, that would likely help people with heavy luggage, people with strollers. If you're making something accessible to people that are deaf or hard of hearing, with vibrations or visual alerts, that would benefit someone listening to headphones. So there's all these reasons, like in all these ways you can imagine making an accessible shared vehicle would benefit many. That's how we've been thinking about it so far. And like Carol said, mostly thinking of the fleet model to start with.
Ivan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I know we're getting close on time, so I'll try to be quick. So 2 points. I think, yes, I think in the end, the type of inclusive, the product, the service is going to be a little different. And I think partly it has to do with the ability or the expectation that you can customize the vehicle if it's a private vehicle. I think Rory Cooper gave an excellent example. He bought his car, he's still waiting 2 weeks for all those features, for it to be customized, right, to his liking. If it's a shared vehicle, yes, the expectation is that hypothetically, any and everybody that comes up to the vehicle should be able to use it, right? And so there's a different kind of level of expectation in these two scenarios. That being said, I think what I would encourage everybody to think about is, instead of focusing on making the end product inclusive, for now, focus on making your design process inclusive, right? And that's by bringing in users of different capabilities, bringing them time and again, making that iterative. And good chance, if your design process is inclusive, your end outcome will be inclusive, right? By that very nature of that process. So focus on the process, focus on the method, and the end result will work itself out. At least that's my 2 cents. Given that many of you are operating on a very short timeline, right? With your proposals due in a couple of months or a month.
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic way to put it into just really practical terms. We actually have a couple more minutes. We're running a little bit ahead, actually. So we have a couple more minutes for one last question, because it's a really interesting and I think probably important one. When you're thinking about sort of designing for a vehicle for wheelchair accessibility, you know, right now there are so many aspects of that require a human attendant. Of course, when you start talking about autonomous vehicles, and there's the time, you know, frame for that is, you know, and what other technology might happen. Should teams be assuming that you know, that there will be an attendant, or should they be trying to solve some of those issues? Sort of a few thoughts from both of you would be wonderful. Shani, can we start with you?
Sure. So, you know, I know that's something that we're thinking about. It's definitely a process to get there. So just to make the point, first of all, some people will always need an attendant. AVs aren't going to change that. And as long as you need an attendant, there might be options to also use a human-driven vehicle in the meantime while we're building these autonomous vehicles. However, for people that could and want to travel without an attendant, you know, there's issues like independent wheelchair securement that need to be solved. That's something that will still take, I mean, people are starting to talk about it, but it'll still take many years in order to get these standards passed, right? So this is something that, you know, we've talked a lot in other panels about. So I think that it's promising, and this is a goal that we're all looking toward, but it'll definitely take a couple of generations. I believe personally, I think you're going to see, it's not going to be a switch that's just going to be flipped.
Clive, any thoughts on that?
Yes. So I think for the time being, we will have attendance, partly because our designs, our solutions are not robust enough yet. We haven't fully understood all the situations, the scenarios where help might be needed beyond the typical, you know, wheelchair ramp deployment, wheelchair securement. Even if some of those tasks get automated, we have not fully understood all those range of situations. And one of the concerns when we talk to people is, okay, the design is accessible, it's inclusive under normal conditions of operation. What if there's an emergency? What if I need help? What if I need to get out of this vehicle in a hurry, right? Who do I call? There's nobody here, right? And it relates to the issue of trust, I think that Carol was mentioning in the previous panel. Even before these events actually happen, right? People are thinking about these. What would happen in those eventualities? And right now, we haven't fully mapped that out yet, right? We haven't fully designed some of those conditions. And so I think for the time being, we would expect to see attendance. Now, the role of the attendant, what role they play beyond just the driver, I think that might evolve with technology, with design, as more and more tasks get automated. But we should not forget that currently, especially in public transit vehicles, the biggest accessibility feature or biggest accessibility resource inside a public bus is the driver, right? Because people would ask them for directions, know how far their bus stop is, or help them with wayfinding, or know where they've gotten off, so then where they need to go next. So the driver is a huge accessibility resource beyond just driving that vehicle and securing the wheelchair, right? And if we take out that human component from the system, that's a scary prospect for a lot of people, right? And I think we need to be mindful of that as we think about driverless autonomous vehicles.
It's so fascinating to me, because this is actually something that autonomous vehicles companies themselves in their products are starting to confront already, as they move from, you know, having a safety driver behind the wheel to being fully driverless. Obviously, that's a huge technological feat to get that level of reliability in your autonomous driving system, but also it creates all kinds of user experience challenges of all kinds related to accessibility and not, you know, that they're still sort of having to learn by doing, because there's no playbook for this stuff. And so, you know, this is why we're so grateful that both of you, Dr. Shani Jayan and Dr. Clive D'Souza, could be here to help us understand and explain this really important and really fascinating and emerging field. Thank you to the both of you so much for making the time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And with that, I will turn it over to PAVE's Executive Director, Tara Andringa, for some concluding remarks.
Thanks so much, Ed. And thank you to everyone for joining us today, both for the audience for tuning in and to the panelists for their incredible insights. We really want to encourage people to join the challenge. We've put together lots of resources, there are a ton of resources on DOT's website, particularly DOT's open forum, and also we have put together a list of resources on PAVE's website. As many of the guests said today, talked about the importance of engaging with potential users, and we have lots of organizations that are eager to assist. PAVE members, National Federation of the Blind and United Spinal, both Carol Tyson today from DREDF mentioned, they're available to assist as well. We are happy to help make those connections, and we are incredibly excited to see the projects that come about, and we're hopeful for the future that they bring. Thank you all for joining us today.